You in the room for listening, and the 70 or 80 people that are home. Nice to be able to share this experience virtually and in person.
Just 1 second here. We're not seeing the, oh, okay. Okay, we're seeing online. The presentation's not up online yet, though.
The slides look better than I do, so probably we should put those up. Oh, yeah.
Okay, good to go.
Okay, great. So yes, nice to be here. And as I say, nice to be getting out to meetings again and seeing people face to face. I'll just take a second for those of you that maybe don't know me. My name's Andrew Byers, and I work with the Atlantic Tech Transfer Team for apiculture. We're a group that focuses on research and extension around pollination, I guess would be the term. So we're beekeepers, and we support the beekeeping community to provide pollination services for the blueberry industry. We've been doing that since about 2017, and we're just coming to the end of a 5-year cycle in this project. We've really enjoyed the opportunity to work with both those industries. I also am joined by my colleague Annie Bennett, and the two of us together make up the team that is ATTTA. And we're going to have a bigger team shortly. We'll hopefully have a couple of summer students, we've got a student doing work placement with us, which is new and very interesting to us. So busy time, and I'll just proceed on to the topic. When Peter invited us to speak today, of course I said yes, and he suggested a topic, and he said something like, maybe you can talk about all the research that's been done in the past around pollination, and what ATTA's done previously, and what you're doing now. And I said, well, just that then. My next question was, how much time do I have? So this is going to be a kind of a whistle-stop tour of some aspects of current research, some work that the team has done, and what we looked at last year and what we hope to look at this year. I was given direction on how to advance this. Oh, there we go. So I didn't quite know where to start. As I say, this is quite a big thing that we've undertaken to discuss with you this afternoon. I wasn't quite sure where to begin. So I came across this diagram, and I looked at it, and I thought, oh, my word, what the heck is that? It's something to do with pollination. But having spent the morning with blueberry producers, and talking to a couple of them at lunchtime, you're probably just looking at that going, yeah, that summarizes it. So this just shows, and I would never intentionally torture people through a giant mess of a diagram like this. It's not mine, but it is a good overview, and sort of sets the scene for what we want to talk about this afternoon. Because getting blueberries produced on a field, there's so many factors that are involved in that. And I think this summarizes it quite nicely. And if you look at all of that, you can see fruit set and yield and income, which is what we're trying to achieve. But there's one little bubble there that I've highlighted, which is bee foraging density. So in this big picture, which is blueberry production, for the next half hour or so, we're going to concentrate on that one little aspect, which is bee foraging density. So in order to do that and organize my thoughts, I've started to think, okay, well, there's lots of things that go into that. And ultimately, we get asked the question, and people want to know, how many hives should I place? Where should I put them? When should I put them? And there's an awful lot of factors that lead up to that. And most of these things are way out of our control, and some of them are out of the control of the producers. So this diagram makes me feel a lot better, because this is columns and lines and things like that. So if you look from the top down, you can see, well, there's things that are just completely out of our control, and the arrow on the right kind of indicates in red that these are things we really can't change. But as you move, and this doesn't summarize the process in any way, but it's just a number of things to make the point. As we kind of work down through the things that we can do, and when I say we, I mean beekeepers, blueberry producers, and the team at ATTTA, we can really look at things like managed pollinators, and then within that you've got your choices: bumblebees, leafcutter bees, and then honeybees, which is what we're here to talk about. And in that, you can then make decisions about stocking rates, placement, and timing. So in this big picture, as I say, to kind of create a foundation to our talk, we're just going to talk about those few things that are so important to that overall production system. So again, in order to kind of help me and get my head around it and maybe set the scene a little bit more for what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, I put this diagram together because I think as kind of there's no actual data in here, as you can see. This is just a theoretical diagram of this process that we're going to talk about. And some of the points that we want to make a little bit later, if you keep this in your head as we go through it, I think it'll make a little bit more sense. So here we've got what I've titled the pollinator contribution to wild blueberry yield. And you can see on one axis, it's just a percentage. So there's no actual yield figures in there in terms of kilograms per hectare. But what we're trying to get is to move towards that near 100%, which is the potential of this individual hypothetical field. So in that process, what we've got is we've got our native pollinators, and they're represented by that blue box at the bottom. So they do some work to contribute to pollination, which ultimately supports our yield. And how much work the native pollinators do depends on a lot of other factors. I think we're going to use the term other factors a lot in this discussion, just as a catch-all phrase. But the native pollinators are providing some of that necessary pollination. So you can see there, I've indicated, and in the literature and looking around at what other people have found, the suggestion is that somewhere between 20 and 55% of the pollination will be done by native pollinators in this box that we've called background pollination. There is no absolute number that we can apply to this. It depends on the year, it depends on where the field is, it depends on other factors. But you know, there's an agreement that probably 40%, I've put arbitrarily, but maybe up towards 40%. There's some good researchers that throw the figure of 36% around a lot. But there's a range of background pollination that's going to set the stage. And then what we want to do with our honeybees and our managed pollinators is to create this blue curve that's there. So you can see on the bottom, we've put hives per hectare, and we put some numbers in there. But if we imagine that when we place the honeybee colonies, or bumblebees or leafcutter bees, but we'll talk about honeybees, when you place your managed pollinators on the field, you will get an increase in yield. And we'll show that initially you get quite a straight linear increase. So it's going to be a straight line. And then when the other factors come into play, that line starts to deviate from linear. And ultimately it will plateau and level off at some point. So if we kind of keep this picture in our mind as we talk through some of the work that's been done to support our decisions with pollinators. So the first question is, how many hives? And this picture of one lonely colony I don't think is the answer. But nonetheless, it's a question that often gets asked. So when researchers have looked at this, there's been some work done on it to determine that. And this is some good work that's come out of Maine. Frank Drummond is a well-respected researcher there. And he published this quite recently, and this shows pretty much what I just talked about. If you look at the yields of figure A, and you see kilograms of berries per hectare, and you look at the hives down below, you can see that the model that he's placed as represented by that line through the data shows a fairly linear increase, fairly straight line increase in the yield. So here is a suggestion: you put hives on the field, you increase yield in a linear way. The one on the right is the resulting income, and it's in US dollars in 2011, $12. I've placed the blue line there again, which is just an estimation of what that might mean in Canadian dollars today. But nonetheless, you can see there's a direct relationship, as we'd expect, between kilograms of berries and income. So some of the early work that was done with ATTTA looked at this same thing. And we did demonstrate, and this was work that was done under the lead of Robin McCollum, it was demonstrated that, again, when we increased our stalking rate, you can see what appears to be a linear increase in this case, what's deemed pollination success. And the definition is there of what they thought was what is thought to be pollination success. So if you imagine inside those boxes, the line that's sort of in the middle of them, that represents the median measure of pollination success, you can see that is increasing. And if you imagine a line drawn through them, it would be in a linear fashion. So we've got some good evidence of that, that linear relationship between stocking rates and our yield or pollination success. There is some other interesting work that was done a little earlier, and I think it's important to consider this as well, because again, we've got yield in kilograms there, and we've got hive density in terms of the number, the stocking rate. And the suggestion that this research put forward was that, yes, there is a linear relationship between the number of managed pollinators used and the yield, but at some point, that linear relationship starts to break down. So in the early stocking, the lower stocking rates, we're seeing a very clear linear relationship, but there is a point at which it's no longer linear. So we need to consider that it's not an indefinite linear relationship. So to apply that, and again, just because it's after lunch, we might as well do some math, eh? I just thought we'd throw some math up there for everybody. And luckily for me, the answers are already here because I'm not doing math after lunch either. But there is some formulas. There's a few of these that have been put forward. This is one, again, from the same research team that was published fairly recently. And if you look at that top line, you can see that 1754.85 figure, what that represents really is what they thought if you do no pollination with managed pollinators, that's what your yield would be. So that's that blue box. If you remember back to the original diagram, that's the blue box. And it seems to be, in what I've read in preparation for this talk, around that 2000 mark is what we'd expect that blue box to represent in terms of yield. And then they said if you add a hive, honeybee hives, then you multiply that by 216.39, and that will tell you what the increase in yield is for that field. So as I said, I did the math before because I need quiet space to sit and do this carefully. So again, if you don't add any hives, if you apply 0, then your kilogram of berries per hectare is around that 2,000 kilograms. In the second example, you put 5 hives per hectare, then you would see that you get up to 2835. Checking the math for me. Thank you, Pete. He's got his calculator checking the math, which I really appreciate.
I'm converting to imperial.
Oh, I see. Well, I must say that I work in acres, and then it's in hectares, and then it's in pounds, and then it's in kilograms, so a bit all over the shop. But I think what we need to realize with this simple model, that this suggests an entirely linear relationship. That if you keep adding hives and multiplying the number of hives by that figure of 216.39, that it's a linear relationship. And it isn't, as we said, as we established, at some point, that early linear relationship will start to break down. Some of the other work that's out there that makes the same suggestions are Leonard Eaton, who was actually my neighbor and a friend of our family when I grew up. He did some work here in Truro, and he suggests that 192 kilograms of berries for every honeybee hive added. There's other work that suggests up to 400 kilograms of berries. And this figure, I wasn't going to put it in because this work suggests that 1,971 kilograms of berries per hive. And I don't understand, that seems high to me. I did leave it in. I read that part of the paper about 4 times thinking, is this right? Is this right? But it seems quite high. But nonetheless, you can see there's a range there. But again, suggesting a return on your investment for hives placed on blueberry fields somewhere within that range. So early work done by Robin McCollum with the ATTTA team in one of the papers, they demonstrate that at 5.1 hives per acre, the yield on those fields that had that stocking rate were double what they saw in other fields. So again, we can see the merit of, and in some measurable way, what's going on with placing honeybee hives on fields. So the other question that is out and about is where do we place hives? Somebody's probably sitting here or online going, I know those hives, and thank you, whoever you are, to letting us access them last summer for some field work that we did. So where do we need to place the hives? Well, we've done some investigation ourselves on this, and I just want to go through this figure because it's important to understand what we looked at. Because we blundered out into blueberry fields. Well, we actually walked very carefully through blueberry fields, but on this pattern. So if you imagine A is where we started, and behind A would be honeybee colonies. So we walked out into the field from where the honeybee colonies were placed, and we did a field assessment at A. And then we walked on a 45-degree angle, about 50 meters, because I don't have to tell you guys in a blueberry field, there's no way to measure exactly 50 meters, because over the ground or through the air, but we estimated about 50 meters out, and we did an assessment again. We went back the other way to C, did another assessment, back to D, another assessment, and up to E to do the final assessment. So we estimate that that's probably, and conservatively, about 150 meters into the field. And to put that in context for us all, most of the fields we visited were small to medium fields, and we were getting near the backs of those fields. So we covered the breadths of most of the fields that we looked at. And again, the figure on the right shows what would be a 15-acre block. And then if you imagine from A to E, it's that same zigzag pattern. And it shows this significant area that we looked at. So with our research, we could comfortably say, in this area of the field, we kind of have an idea what's going on. And when we did that, quite often when you do research and you set things up, you want to see a difference. You will say, okay, I've got this control group and I'm going to apply this treatment and then I'm going to get a difference. But what we wanted to see was no difference. We didn't want to see a difference between those field locations, because we wanted to say, okay, from the placement of those colonies out into that field, at least 150 meters, we were seeing consistently well-pollinated plants. And when we looked at that, we looked at fruit set. Again, you look across the breadth of those fields, the means of all those fields, there is no difference in fruit set. We looked at fruit at harvest, which again has been referred to earlier as pollination success. There's no difference in pollination success across those fields. We also weighed berries, we counted seeds and berries and did other things, but specifically to show you there was no difference in berry weight. So that tells us that across the breadth of that field, in our assessment, there was no difference between the plants that were very near the honeybee colonies and the plants that were over 150 meters away. So that was good. That was reassuring and kind of gave us an answer that we wanted. Other research has looked at the same thing. And I just wanted to report on this earlier work, again done by Eaton and his team. And if you look at all those little dots and dashes, etc., the ones on the bottom, the open circles represent honeybees. And what this is showing us is that in comparison with bumblebees and solitary bees, if you imagine a line going right through all those circles, that it's flat. So they're telling us that in their research, and they didn't go as far as we did, they only went up to 30 meters, there was no difference in the proportion of fruit set when you looked at the distance from the colonies, or the nests, as they said, to 30 meters out from them. And we're fairly confident that honeybees are going to work more consistently across the field. There's been some good research done. Chris Cutler, I don't know if he's joining us online today or here, but he's done some good work about pollination around the perimeters of fields and bumblebees and honeybee and how they operate. But what you can see in the other lines with the X's and the solid dots representing solitary bees and bumblebees, that line's dropping off. So that's telling us that fruit set, proportional fruit set, decreases as you move away from the nest of those pollinators. So again, this tells us that honeybees are going to be consistent across the field. We don't know the absolute breadth of that, but from what we measured and this research, that's indicative of honeybees being consistent in how they're going to pollinate across the blueberry field. So that was reassuring. So the next question is how strong, and you can see this, a beautiful picture. It makes me want to get into my bees. We haven't been able yet, had the good weather to get in, but I know that this is a strong colony, and I know that's on a blueberry field, and I know that's blueberry honey. So here we've got exactly what we want to see going on, or what blueberry producers want to see going on. A busy colony going out and visiting the blueberry plants. In this case, they're bringing back the nectar and making honey, but we know they're doing their job. So that's a reassuring picture. But in terms of absolute strength, what should we be looking at? So with the work that we did last summer, and considering other people's opinions and research on this, we've come up with a statement that we feel describes what the strength of a honeybee colony should be when used for blueberry pollination. And I'm thinking, I'm starting to think maybe a good analogy for this would be that the honeybees are another treatment that's applied to the blueberry field. And like any other treatment, there's guidelines and label instructions and concentrations and those sorts of things. So this is kind of the similar thing for what a honeybee colony or pollination unit should look like. So to summarize, you want to have 8 frames of bees, 4 frames of brood, a laying queen, 20,000 individual insects in equipment that, in this case, the 10-frame deep Langstroth to prevent swarming. So I feel almost like that should come on the side as sort of instructions, like when you get your pesticides and other treatments, they have instructions on the side. This is what you should have in this colony. And I think the other side of it too is we're moving away from the suggestion that stronger is better. And I think to extend that analogy, if you'll allow me, with your other treatments, if you're applying a treatment and the directions say, and I'm going to just arbitrarily make some figures up, that 1,000 liters per acre is the application rate, you wouldn't think, well, if 1,000 liters is good, let's do 2 and expect twice the results. And honeybees are the same in that if we have too many bees in the colony, if they're too strong, then they won't do their job. And when bees get very strong and there's an awful lot of activity in the colony, they start to think about swarming. And that's a natural process that bees go through. It's the way they reproduce. But when they're thinking about swarming, they're not thinking about pollinating. And if they do leave that box during blueberry pollination, not only is that pollination power lost to the blueberry producer, because those bees are not going to be pollinating, even though they might still be in the area, they have other things on their mind when they've leading up to swarming and just afterwards. It's also a pollination unit that potentially is lost for the next year. So what we want to do is have appropriate strength to do the job, and then as beekeepers, we want to get those colonies home after pollination and manage that process so that we can increase or sustain the same number of pollination units for the next year. So this is how strong a colony should be. And there is some work that we've started to look at on strength and plant factors. And again, you'll see these similar measures of fruit set and final berry, or pollination success, if you'd rather, final berry weight. And you can see that when the fields we looked at last year, there is a relationship between, and this is this line going through, this modeled line that we've applied to this data. The observed relationship that we see shows that there is a positive correlation, is not the exact correct term, but a positive correlation between the strength of the colonies, the mean strength of the colonies on the field, and the results that we want to have in terms of pollination success. So we're starting in our thoughts with ATTTA and discussing with industry, it's not just the number of hives on the field, but it's the strength of those. And I'm starting to feel, and I may have people disagree with me, but the important thing is that we have consistent strength so we know what we're getting, rather than looking at just the stronger the better, because that's probably old-fashioned and not really productive thinking. So this gives us some insight into how strong the colony should be, and we were quite pleased with the results of this. So there's got to be some conclusions to all of this, and I feel in looking at this and considering what other people have done in their research, it's very difficult to apply anything absolute. And with the pollination units and the beekeepers working with blueberry producers, we can provide you the number and the strength of hives that will do the job, and then all the other factors are needed to be taken into consideration, which is why there is no absolute. And it would be great if we could answer the question, how many hives should I place? And you just say, here's a number, but it's not as simple as that. But it seems that the initial stocking rates, perhaps up to 4 hives per hectare, we will see that linear increase. So that's when you're going to get this, fairly confidently a linear increase in yield. What that will be, according to the research, there's a range, and I've kind of stayed stuck on the conservative side in the range, and you guys can do the maths on what that means in terms of income. But 2,000 to 4,000 kilograms per hectare in that first initial linear increase. But then there's going to be a point at which, and I'm not comfortable with an absolute figure, but there is going to be a point at which those individual field variables come into play. And at that point, you will see diminishing returns on every colony that's applied. And that's where the knowledge and expertise of the individual producer and knowing their fields comes into the equation quite nicely. The other thing that's come out of this is larger fields may benefit most from honeybee pollination, which I think we've known, but again, it's just reassuring because of honeybee behavior, and I alluded to it before, they are better at working across a field more consistently. Strength of the colonies should be somewhere along the guidelines that we've recommended. And it would seem from our work, and we want to do more on this, we want to do more field work this year, that the results that we got last year would suggest that, putting those hives every 300 meters would cover that breadth of field that we researched last year for consistent pollination. So that's some insight perhaps into placement. I'm doing a lot of talking, Peter. If people have questions along the way, then that's fine, or if anything comes in. So where are we going to take this in terms of the tech transfer team? Well, we want to look at efficiencies, and we want to look at how we can get the most out of our bees. And I just had really good news this morning. We've received our funding for this summer to do our field work. So now that I've got all that money, what I'd really like to do is go on a holiday, but I won't. I will take that money and I will start to get ready for our field season this year. And I'll be reaching out to and working through the association to find beekeepers and blueberry producers who are willing to work with us on that, because we can't do this work without support, financial support, which we're ever so grateful for, but hands-on support from blueberry producers and beekeepers, because we want to look at different ways of placing colonies on blueberry fields to ensure that we're getting the most out of the limited resource, which is our honeybees in Nova Scotia and Eastern Canada. The other thing that I want to look at and feels really important is to start looking at strength and stocking rates. Again, there's some interesting work, and I just came across this, and I'll put the quote up there for you, a new paper. And this is on, dare I say the word, high bush blueberries, but nonetheless, it might give us some insight into our wild blueberry industry as well. And they've just done some interesting work to look at hive strength and what the implications are on. And along with this, the combination of bumblebees and honeybees and the interaction of them. And I think if we could understand more about that, we could be much more efficient as well. So this was just some new work that said when hive density, and they mean by that the stocking rates, was combined with strength assessment, hive size assessment is what they need, an overall significant positive relationship between hive density size and honeybee visitations per minute is indicated. So I think that's reassuring, but I think, you know, our work on strength now and looking at the strength of the colonies on the blueberry fields is going to give us some more important insight, maybe along the lines of what's being found in other areas. So that's where we'd like to go with this from there. We can't do any of it, as I say, without help from all of our partners. We're so happy to be part of this community, which is the blueberry and the honeybee industry, and to be able to work within Perennia. It's a great pleasure. And I know that by funding us, with that comes a lot of trust, which we take very seriously, and like to thank you for that. So with that, I don't know, Peter, are we good for time for some questions?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes for some questions, and I'm sure that there's be a few questions on that.
Okay, there's some references there if people want. I'll just leave that up while we chat.